Hello, I am back from my hiatus. I am outside, as you can see, on a very cloudy day. It's actually lightly sprinkling on me, which is very poor conditions with which to do a book review. But maybe, maybe this will encourage me to be direct and straight to the point. A few weeks ago, I made a video about Evangeline Walton and her Mabinogion Tetralogy, which I believe to be one of the best and most underrated works of fantasy fiction ever produced. In the grand scheme of things, the video was very well received. Lots of people saying, wow, haven't heard of Evangeline Walton, now I want to check her out. Or, alternatively, hey, I read a lot of Evangeline Walton back in the day, thank you so much for talking about her. Both of which are things that I really love to hear. I ended the video with a plea. I said, Evangeline Walton died with so many unpublished books to her name, and it's a real shame that none of those books ever got the publishing that they deserve in their lifetime. I am happy to tell you that there is a new Evangeline Walton book that you can buy right now. I know what you're thinking. Did my video single-handedly spark enough interest in Evangeline Walton to warrant a new book getting released? The answer to that is nope! The book came out 4 months ago, like months and months before my video, and I just didn't realize it. I'm such a stupid idiot. To be fair to me, the only way you would find out that there is a new Evangeline Walton book available for purchase is if you went to the official Evangeline Walton blogspot, which has barely been updated in the last 10 years. A blogspot that I checked out religiously when I was reading the Mabinogion Tetralogy back in January and February. And then this book got released in March or April, I think. I'm so stupid. I guess I can't blame myself that much, but because of the relatively low-key announcement of this book, it has exactly 0 reviews or ratings on Goodreads, and it has exactly 0 reviews or ratings on Amazon. And considering that this is a book that you can exclusively get from Amazon, that ain't good, fam. This book, which is available both physically and in ebook format, is called Dark Runs the Road. This is actually a re-release of her 1956, I think, historical novel, The Cross and the Shield, which in my previous video I mentioned that was her most obscure work. This book was edited and re-released by Douglas Anderson, who is the man who is currently the executor of Evangeline Walton's estate. He released the first round of posthumous releases back in 2013. Totally coincidental, nothing to do with me whatsoever. A few months ago, he announced his intention to release all of her books that hadn't previously been released. Dark Runs the Road is the first of a series of new and restored works from Evangeline Walton's papers. As I was saying earlier, it's technically a re-release of The Cross and the Sword. As Douglas Anderson says in the introduction, Evangeline Walton sold the book in the mid-50s. She wanted the title to be Dark Runs the Road, but the publishers who bought it did 3 things. 1, they changed the title to The Cross and the Sword, a title she thought sucked. 2, I think they cut it down by over 1/3 of the text, leaving it in very mangled, abridged form. And then 3, they stiffed her on the royalties. So that sucks. So I think the reason why the original iteration of this book is her most obscure work is that it's the one that not only did she have the most editorial difficulties with, but also it has literally been out of print since 1960. And basically this new release, it restores so much content that it is basically a brand new book. Dark Runs the Road is a historical novel about Vikings. This is a book that is centered around the conflict between the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons in early 11th century England. If you like The Broken Sword by Poul Anderson, The Northman, directed by Robert Eggers, the TV show Vikings, or I should say Vikings Valhalla, a show that I have not watched but seems to be sharing a lot of elements of this book, and especially, this is my number one recommendation, the recently completed and excellent Viking manga, Vinlandsaga, written and drawn by Makoto Yukimura, actually astounded me how much this book serves as a companion to Vinland Saga. For those of you who have read it, deals with many of the same themes about cycles of violence between different ethnic groups, the contrast between vengeance and mercy, and how that really rots you from the inside out. The desire to do violence, and especially the desire to do violence against those who have harmed you. It has a lot of the same historical characters, you know, Sweyn Forkbeard, fan favorite Thorkel the Tall, Canute, and also, fascinatingly, this covers all of the events that leads directly into the beginning of Vinland Saga. Like, you can read this book and then you can read Vinland Saga and it forms like a perfect tapestry. Dark Runs the Road follows the entire life of a young Norse lad named Sweyn Haraldsson, who is the son of this great Viking chief. But even from birth, he is entirely alienated from this culture because his mother was a Christian woman who was abducted by Harald years and years before. Alas, I have been forced to move. Being outside is a mistake. Anyway, as I was saying, Sweyn grows up completely alienated by his own culture. He finds himself more ingratiated with the local Laplanders, what we now know today as the Sami people. However, due to a series of events, Sweyn is forced to leave his homeland behind and travel to England as an exile, as a refugee. That first part is really the setup for the narrative as a whole. Danes and Norsemen have colonized and captured the entire north of England, this area that has come to be known as the Danelaw, while terrorizing the Anglo-Saxons who live in the south, looting and plundering when they see fit. But for the most part, it actually behooves them to not fully ransack and conquer England. The real scheme is to terrify the English enough that they will pay this thing called the Danegeld. They just give you 24,000 gold pieces or even more, and they say, here's all the gold we have, don't attack us for 2 years, 5 years, however long it takes. By continuously exercising the possibility of horrible violence against the English, the Danes can become very wealthy while having to do relatively little work. But the English get poorer and poorer, and they become more and more scared of the possibility of Viking invasion. On the other hand, not every Dane up in England is as gung-ho about raiding and pillaging anymore, right? They become farmers. They just want to settle down. And most importantly, they convert to Christianity. Christianity is the number one theme of the entire book. I know a lot of viewers who hear those words suddenly feel a shudder through their hearts, right? To be clear, I do not identify as religious. I'm not associated with any faith or spiritual practice, but I just find religion a very fascinating concept. And unfortunately, I think that many people in the West, or in America especially, the well has been so poisoned by 20th and 21st century evangelical style Christianity that whenever young people these days hear those words, their instinct is to freak out, honestly with good reason. How many times have you heard the words Christian fantasy and then subsequently pelted with the worst shit imaginable, like Left Behind or whatever? Even Narnia, which is a classic, Clive Staples being so unsubtle with his theming really acts against those books in an age where, again, most people who are on the internet are far more secular. I think whenever someone today hears this is a book about Christianity, the assumption is that it's going to be one of two things, right? It's either going to be the Chronicles of Narnia, it's trying to convert you, or alternatively, it could be a boo, Christianity's bad book. You know, it could be like Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. Another excellent book series, but another one that is just as unsubtle in its atheism as Clive Staples is unsubtle in his Christianity. Every once in a while, you have books, and these are the books that I love, which do approach religion in the third way, where they get really weird and nuanced in their evaluations of faith. And I think an obvious example for this, for many people who are watching, is Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun. What if a Christ figure was an absolute sociopath? So with all that out of the way, Dark Runs the Road asks the question, what does it mean for Christianity to exist in the year 1002 Anno Domini? In an era so filled with absolute violence and brutality, how could anyone possibly be Christian? How could anyone possibly believe that there is a loving God when such horrible things can happen to you at any moment and you are never going to hear any sort of answers? The way I phrase it makes it sound like this is just going to be a easy Christianity thumbs down book. But again, it gets so much more nuanced than that. I do want to pause a second and do a disclaimer right now, which I should have done at the beginning of the video. But Dark Runs the Road is an extraordinarily dark book, as the title indicates, right? The darkest work from Evangeline Walton I have read yet. It has a grim first half, and then the second half goes to some truly wretched and heartbreaking places. So this being a book about Vikings, you already have to have the content warnings for brutal acts of violence and sexual assault. Then once you're in the second half of the book, the most devastating events happen. This is like the Red Wedding, but much worse. And it leads to what is maybe the single saddest paragraph. Like, I just had to put the book down and come back to it a week later just because it was so heartbreaking. To go back to where I was, in part two, Sweyn travels to England. He ingratiates himself amongst the local Vikings, but he also falls in love with a Christian girl. So he converts to Christianity, but it's clear he's not really into any of this Jesus stuff. He just converts to be with this woman who, even though he is a Christian Viking, doesn't really buy a lot of the lore. He is very cynical about a lot of what Christianity teaches. How can you ascribe to this faith of ultimate love and forgiveness and repentance and have your day job be murdering everyone you come across, right? As the Vikings continuously conquer wider and wider chunks of England, the Anglo-Saxons become more and more desperate. And that is where things really take a dark turn at around the 2/3 point. This leads to the final chunk of the book, which is subtitled The Wolf Age, which is such a sick subtitle because that's a reference to the original poetic description of Ragnarok in the Voluspa. I'm trying to speak generally to not really give away the twists and turns, but in this final part, Sweyn has been so affected by the events that have occurred earlier in the book that he is basically a different person. which all leads into ending that you are not necessarily expecting, but once it happens, you kind of understand what the whole book was about, right? It leads into the whole reason why Evangeline Walton wrote this book in the first place. When you're reading through these Anglo-Saxon chronicles, there is a single sentence that refers to a single person who does something truly unexpected. And this person never shows up ever again throughout history. We know absolutely nothing else about this human being except for what is in that one sentence. And Evangeline Walton came across that sentence, and she was so moved by it that she wanted to write an entire book explaining that one person's life story and what would have had to happen to get them to do the thing that they did. And that person, as you can guess, is Swain. This book is immaculately researched. She was using all of the most recent and in-depth sources that she had access to in the 1950s. That is a blessing and a curse. The politicking in this book is truly dense. A lot of characters have these interlocking backstories with different kings, with different princesses, etc. in the 100 previous years leading up to the book. All of these different political machinations that have occurred and have traumatized the different characters have heavily informed all the events that are occurring today, both in the grand scheme of things as well as person to person. The problem is, since all of these different political figures that are essential to the book's backstory are Anglo-Saxon, literally every single one of them has a name that begins with E. Elfgida, Edward, Edgar, Edwy. I will admit it was a little hard to keep track of them because all of these different Anglo-Saxons have names that are so similar to each other, but Evangeline Walton did not believe in contradicting the written history. You know, all of these are real people that she is drawing from, and she's telling their different hurts and their tragedies. I recently read Ursula K. Le Guin's iconic essay From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, where she talks about fantasy prose and how a lot of modern fantasy, and by modern we mean 1973, where she talks about how most fantasy suffered from the fact that it didn't truly commit to fantastical prose. It didn't use language that transported you to another world. It just used the vernacular of modern day Earth rather lazily. And it's so funny that she wrote that back in 1973 or whatever, considering that literally every fantasy book that gets written now is, so that just happened. But anyway, in this essay, Evangeline Walton is one of the 7 people she mentions as having the best prose in all of fantasy. And the only woman she mentions as well, which I thought was interesting. The others that she credits are Lord Dunsany, E.R. Edison, J.R.R. Tolkien, Kenneth Morris, who is the guy who wrote the other Mabinogion fantasy novel, James Branch Cabell, and Jack Vance. And I think when she was writing that, Ursula K. Le Guin would only have read like 2 or 3 of the Mabinogion books. It really made me focus on the prose of Dark Runs the Road, which ultimately is beautiful, but less ornate than what you find in the Mabinogion. She is able to modulate herself to describe all of these different events and peoples as a Viking would. I'll read the first little bit for you just to give you an idea. I must have been born in the Christian year 982. In the north we did not yet count the years, letters we had, the holy mysterious runes of All-Father Odin, but we used them mostly for magic and on gravestones. We wrote no records and kept no histories. Ours was still Saga land, the land nearest the world's end, nearest the rime cold sea of the Elfland, the great icebergs that float in waters beyond which lies no land of man. Jotunheim was said to lie beyond it, the home of the frost giants, the foes of man. They would have slain us with everlasting winter had not Thor fought for us. Thor, the son of Earth and Odin. Thor, whose hammer was the thunder, whose beard was as red as the blood he spilled, protecting his mother, the earth. No wonder, since it is as easy for men to make gods in their own image as it seems to be hard for God to work something of his image into man, that we saw Thor too as a warrior, one who, like us, had to fight hard to live. Dark Runs the Road is an excellent and brutal examination of the interplay between Viking cultures and Christianity, and it asks the essential questions: what does it mean to have faith in a world where Vikings could literally murder you at any moment, right? It is not for the faint of heart, but if you have the stomach for it, I think it can be a truly cathartic and emotional and moving read. So if this book sounds interesting to you at all, I'm going to link the Amazon page in the description. I am not going to use an affiliate link because I just want people to check it out. If it does sound like a book that you're not interested in reading, then at the very least, I am going to link the Evangeline Walton blog spot. If you could do me a favor, it would be really nice if you just commented on the blog spot saying, "Yay! Thank you, Douglas Anderson, for releasing a new Evangeline Walton book. I would love to read more of her books." Just leave a nice comment. Let him know that there is an audience for it, that there are people out there who are genuinely interested in reading more of Evangeline Walton's work. Now that I'm kind of back from my hiatus, I'm going to be posting a lot of videos. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I love you very much.